we go.
Welcome to Forum, a counseling podcast. We are glad you decided to join us again for this series on the 8 principles of healthy relationships. And today we're on principle number 6, which is the principle of obliging. And Rick and I have had so much conversation before we have even started this episode that our goal now is simply to bring you, the audience, into this conversation that we are having before I hit record, so that you can kind of appreciate and understand all that this principle has and also how all these principles work together. So glad you joined us, Rick. Thank you for coming back again.
Absolutely.
And for helping us through this. So we have been talking about the 8 principles of healthy relationships, and we're on number 6. I'm going to run through the first 5 again to bring people up to speed in case it's been a while since they've heard the other ones or remember what they are. So we have principle number 1, and I should mention all of these are the acronym VIRTUOUS. So if you spell out virtuous, VIRTUOUS, that is an acronym for these 8 principles. So V is veritas, regarding truth and the need to have integrity, or to not only tell the truth, be be full of it.
Lifestyle.
That's right. Okay. Number 2, imputable. The idea of being accountable and taking responsibility for oneself.
Yeah, we've talked about the benefits of taking on that responsibility instead of shirking away from it. So there's benefits to that, and part of that reason is that it's going to create more bonding, a healthier relationship. And so if you want a deeper relationship, step into responsibility.
Number 3 is rational. The idea of being unbiased, trying to be logical, and governed by reason.
Correct. So trying to focus more on facts to get a better perception of things in order to be make better choices, to have a better impact with your family.
Number 4 is temperate. The idea of being I love this terminology, right-sized.
Right. Not being too big or not being too small, recognizing that what we do does have impact, whether we show up or not, but the goal is to try and show up.
Number 5 is unprejudiced, which is the last one we talked about. Free from bias, being able to be open-minded, receptive to feedback.
Right. And this one's really important at this point as we move into this one we're going to currently talk about, which will be obliging. But that one from unprejudiced, that unbiased, it is to be open-minded so that we can learn some new things, try some new things in order to have a different outcome than we've had before. And often it's difficult to think that our thinking might have been an error previously, and just being open to concepts. And again, we have said before, you are not being so open that your brains fall out, right? We've said that a lot. It is to filter things through, what does the Bible say about this? There are many things that come to you that will be presented to you and sound like a good idea. And then you say, that doesn't line up. That's not right. That's not good. Those are the things then you can move on from and have confidence that you're moving on from it. Like, you know why you're doing what you're doing, so to speak. But these are all conceptual ideas at this point of when it comes down to being unprejudiced, is you're trying to be more open to positioning yourself to get something different. And certain things people will try to maneuver you into, they're not good for you. And so what we are asking you to do is filter everything we say biblically, try to substantiate it. Is this going to benefit the people around me? Or is it something that that's not good? So.
Okay. And that leads us into today's principle, which is number 6, obliging. Again, trying to fit all these into the acronym virtuous. The names of some of these have been intentionally chosen, and of course, obliging is a good explanation for this principle, but the definition, according to the, we'll call them show notes that you've given me, are willingness, a disposition of assistance and compliance, and then effort.
Yes.
So expand on this definition of what obliging is in a relationship.
So where we've said with the open, or with the, excuse me, back up a little bit, with the unprejudiced, that's all about positioning yourself to being receptive to feedback. This moving into obliging is critical because it's action based. Although it's still a principle, it's one of those that requires effort. So everything we have talked about is more conceptual. It's ideas, sounds really good. This is the one where the rubber meets the road a little bit, where you can hear about these things, but unless you're obliging, which willing to show up and do some work, none of these will really take fruition, so to speak. So you probably heard this concept a lot. It's like, it's an old saying. It's like, hey, show up ready and willing for work. You're ready and willing. And so it's one thing to be on time. It's one thing to be open to what your supervisor might say. You're willing to take direction. But unless you're open to it, unless you're really willing to go out and do the work, you're not of much benefit. And so trying to recognize that I'm willing to show up and try and give my effort to the purpose of me being here. Like we've said, all of these are principles for relationships. What is it that I'm looking for out of these relationships? And willingness requires effort. So we're talking about if you're going to be obliging to somebody, I'm obliging myself to you in our relationship to help it grow.
So there's a sense in which if you can, and I'll need to attach at some point the list of these for a visual, so that the people listening can maybe even see them listed out in order, copy and paste them into a note on their phone or something where they can actually see these one by one. But if you run back through these and think about them, starting with principle number 1, if you don't tell the truth, and it seems like this is so obvious, so like, of course, my relationship must be based on honesty. Like that's essential. It's like, well, is it? There is so many people that have struggled with just simply telling the truth, just starting out, right? If you can't tell the truth, and I don't just mean air your opinion, of course, but I mean live in integrity and speak truth to other people, even when it's inconvenient and uncomfortable for you. If you can't start there, then you're not going to have a relationship, especially a good one. It's going to be built on lies. It's going to be built on things that aren't sustainable, and it's not going to go well. And then if you have no ability to take accountability, if it's never your fault, if you never see your own part in it, then you're not going to have a healthy relationship. If you are not committed to the facts, but are seemingly always drifting away on your passions, as the Bible would call them, and you're not being rational, then even if you're trying to tell the truth will be skewed by the fact that you're irrational. And if you're trying to take accountability, but you're not being rational, then it's not going to matter. If you're trying to be right-sized, but you're not rational, trying to tell the truth and taking accountability, then you're not going to be right-sized because you're not in touch with the truth, and therefore you can't see the facts, and therefore you're not taking responsibility, and so you're not going to be right-sized, and you're not going to have the humility necessary. And if you're not receptive to feedback, then you have no way to navigate to get to the truth so that you can take responsibility, so that you can be rational, so that you can be right-sized. And then we get to this willingness, right? So you had mentioned before we got on here how key this is to the other ones. And so I kind of wanted to set that up and list those in that way, because if you're not, like, okay, let's say you're a mess. Let's say you're listening to this and you're like, well, I've made all those mistakes, right? Which Rick and I both have. We've been there. we speak of things we know in this case, right?
Right.
So
Right.
we've both been there. If we're there, if this is our problem, if we struggle, okay, then it seems like what you're initially saying is that willingness is the key to get started at that point. It's also running throughout for sure, but it's the key to get started. If I suck at everything else, at least I'm willing to show up.
Agreed. When you were talking about with unprejudiced, trying to be open that maybe you can have different relationships than what you've had in the past. So you're open to that idea. So we've got unprejudiced. I'm unprejudiced about myself. I'm unprejudiced about the people that I'm around. I can be solid in this relationship. There's a thought of that. But then when we start talking to obliging, talking about this concept, this is the do. This is where you actually are willing to put the actual effort into this growth of relationship in this change process. And so what I want to point out is change doesn't happen immediately overnight. There are certain things like life events will happen, and they will they can impact your life tremendously. Injuries are a good thing that kind of bring that to awareness. But we're talking about these kind of personality traits and how we've related to other people. You formed opinions about other relationships based off of your experiences, and that seems like fact. Well, maybe that's not fact, it's your experience. But the fact is, you can have new experiences, you can have deeper relationships. And it's one thing to be open to trying something different in your relationships, but that creates this sense of vulnerability. And so why would we be willing, why would we put ourselves in the position to be obliging in a relationship? Like, they're going to expect something out of me if I show up that way. But it's a positive thing when somebody shows up with you and they're willing to invest in the relationship. You welcome that. And it's a comforting thing, and it builds trust in that relationship. But it's a process. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. And I would like people to recognize the ones we've gone through. You're better at some of them. You're not all bad. Like, there's areas of improvement in every one of them. So if you think I'm great in all of those areas, maybe really reassess that, because we can always improve. And it's frustrating at times to look at these things and go, wow, I've messed up pretty big, but it's like, start somewhere.
Yeah, I think that the person who listens and goes, nailed it, is probably further away than the person who's
Right.
listening. You know,
I agree.
the person who's listening and going, I could make some improvements in that area. But again, it's that right sizeness. If you listen and
Go
go,
back to
I've
temperate.
completely
Yeah,
failed and there's no way, I have no hope of ever having a healthy relationship. Well, you're also wrong size. That's not true.
that's
You
right.
haven't failed.
Exactly.
You can jump on board. You can seek to improve in one area at a time, and you can stack these and begin to apply these, and you can have better relationships. And if you think you've got all this already taken care of and there's no room for improvement, then as Rick politely and professionally said, you need to reassess that. And that's so well said.
Well, you said that previously you had mentioned something about you could picture people listening to this and saying, well, what about me? Like, my circumstances are different. You don't understand what I've gone through. And those are all valid points, but those are also under that area of trying to become unprejudiced. Is maybe we're not so special that we can't learn how to do a few things differently with big impact. Big impact can come from small changes. So if you've tried any of these, like you've just tried to be, more right sized, from that, and trying to be a little more unprejudiced and recognize maybe I can accomplish some things better in these relationships. Just those attitudes coming into it is one thing, but obliging is now we're actually moving from a conception to more application.
I want to bring up the idea here that we're also talking about something that I think is foreign for a lot of people right now. And what I mean by that is we are talking about goals. And where it seems as though I'm not sure if this is cultural or just anecdotal at this point, my own experience, or whether this really is a cultural kind of, I don't want to say phenomenon, but a cultural norm now. What we're talking about are goals to pursue, not things to avoid. And the greatest clickbait on the internet is here's what not to do. Avoid these 3 mistakes. Avoid these 10 things for a better relationship. We love things. We love the law. We're Pharisees at heart, and we really like to know, what am I not supposed to do? And some of us hear what not to do, and we love to go do those things out of rebellion. And some of us hear what not to do, and we love to keep that law so that we can feel self-righteous. But what we're doing here is against the grain of, I think, some of our sinful proclivities toward being a Pharisee and loving the law. And that is, we're not just saying what not to do. All 8 of these principles are building on an idea that these are things you could do in order to have something that you don't already have, or to better a relationship that you already do have. And that's really a goal. It's not just an avoidance. It's not just something that you're trying to not get or something that you don't want to happen to you. These are actually things that if you pursued, you could have. And so the very idea of receiving these things challenges, I think, what is common for us in a lot of ways, which is to just avoid things we don't like. And here we're saying you could have something good, trying to paint that vision, and also here are goals you could pursue to get that good thing. And so this is in a lot of ways a reversal from the negative avoidance that we're used to, and pointing toward a positive pursuing that is unfamiliar to us. And so I just want to point out that if you're listening to this and you're hearing these things and you go, all right, I'm going to try this, the whole concept of trying to implement something may be different than you're used to from your TikTok videos, where it just tells you, here's what not to do. We're talking about something that Scripture lays out. We're talking about principles that have been tried and true, that we've seen work, that we've seen in the counseling room work, that we've seen in relationships work, that is something you could get if you were wanting something, not if you were just avoiding something. So, what are you going to say, Rick?
I think that this is a great point for bringing in the Scripture because 1 Corinthians 10:31 says, "So whatever you eat or drink, do all things unto the glory of God. Give no offense to Jews or Greeks or to the church of God, just as I try to please everyone in everything I do, not seeking my own advantage, but that of many, that they may be saved." So much of what I really appreciate what you were just saying about, we often have a difficulty trying to figure out what we want. We have almost a hypersensitivity of what we don't want. You know, if somebody says, "Hey, do you want to go to a certain restaurant?" or "Where do you want to eat?" And you're like, "I don't care." And then they mention the restaurant and you're like, "I don't want to go there." And so we're commonly attuned to those type of things. But this is trying to get yourself a positioning in a relationship of obliging, which is you're going to put effort into this. If somebody does say, like, "Hey, they're offering you something," you might go with them because that is a preference that they have. But it's not just a preference that they have. You're not just going along with them for no purpose. The purpose from that scripture says, so that they might be saved. So we have a purpose in who we are, and that is to glorify God and to try and seek and save the lost, to encourage people who are saved, to build them up. And we're pretty quick to, the second somebody says, "Do you want to do this?" and you're like, "No, I don't want to do that." Are we then positioning ourselves to build that relationship up or start to tear it down? So this is recognizing my willingness, my obliging is to to ultimately build up the kingdom of God, build that particular person up, not just from, because again, we're going to put in Veritas. Veritas is speaking truth. So we're not just telling people what they want to hear because we want to placate them or we want to talk about like they're going to see me as trying to be after them or being overly critical at them if I tell them the truth. Obliging is you're willing to tell them things in love, but you're at least going to put effort into it. You're going to actually say it. You're not just going to think about it. You're actually going to do. So back to obliging. Obliging is do. And so do is for a purpose. That purpose is for salvation. So let's try to build people up, try to recognize in a relationship, we do have a mission.
I think that the hindrance to willingness or obliging or having a disposition of assistance or putting in the effort is that we often, I know from my own self, where I don't put in effort or where I'm unwilling can often be due to hurt, undealt with hurt or unforgiveness in me, and a fear of getting hurt again, and also a maybe subliminal. So we've talked before, without getting into the weeds, about kind of this primary motivation, which is what I'm thinking about, but then there's like a secondary motivation in me and in us, where it's like with things we don't talk about but are still actually motivating us and driving us. And I think on a level that we might not even be willing to admit sometimes, that we're unwilling to enter into a relationship, or we're not acting out willingly toward another person in a relationship because maybe we don't like to admit this, but we actually kind of want to punish them a little bit. We kind of want them to feel the resistance that we have, and we're hoping that that will cause change in them, that they'll alter themselves in order to try to get us willing.
I think that's a good point. I think potentially taking a look and checking your own, where we were talking about being unprejudiced. You've got a lot of background story as to why I'm doing what I'm doing, whether it's you want them to feel something. But how has that worked out for you? Is that building up the relationship? Is the person figuring it out on their own? Like you just wish that they'd magically figure out what you want them to through that uncomfortable feeling. And some people are really good at that. They can guide people, manipulate people. They're very disagreeable sometimes. We're used to seeing some people that might look like that. But it's like, if you let that go, what happens? Like you're letting go of something else, not out of frivolousness and giving up who you are. You're letting go of something in order to get something better. So is it worth it? Is it worth it to keep doing things the way you've been doing and hoping everybody would figure it out? Or I'm going to show up obliging, I'm going to put in effort. And that way you're probably then going to have to accept, where we talked about being imputable, whether or not it works out or not. And that can be scary.
Well, it also goes into the responsibility aspect too. Like you're saying, imputable, where when I am actively not willing, when I'm entering a relationship, when I'm actively not obliging, when I don't have a disposition of others, others-oriented mentality, it's normally, like I was saying, because I want to control the other person, or I'm trying to affect change in them, or I'm trying to affect how they respond. But what you're describing in this sixth principle of obliging, willingness, effort, really is, if I'm taking responsibility for me, then I'm not going into that relationship, into that room, into that place where I'm looking to change them and alter them, as much as I'm looking to take responsibility for me. And by doing so, it will change their response. It will change how they react to me. But that's not my point. My point is to try to glorify God in my actions and to love others in the way that I'm conducting myself. So if I'm really taking responsibility, if I'm imputable, then willingness shows up as a result of I'm really not expecting you to alter yourself in order to make me better or to make me more comfortable.
Yeah, and that I think that's a really good example, because when you're talking about being obliging and you've previously used different tactics, as you had mentioned about trying to have other people sense your level of being unpleased. Like, what's that like when somebody shows up with you like that? Versus if you drop that, one, it creates an opportunity for something different to occur, and two, they don't know who this is. They're in uncharted water with you. And so we've talked about the baby mobile and the effects that happen if you touch one piece of that mobile. It actually creates a ripple effect, so to speak. And it's the obliging is the willingness to actually do something different to get something different. I'm going to give up this old unhelpful method, and maybe that's your natural tendency of doing things. But I have a confidence that if I do something different, I can see that it will automatically impact the relationship. And then I feel a little more empowered to make an effect than no matter what I do, nothing's going to change, because that can be quite disheartening.
People can sniff out in other people whether they're willing. We feel this about each other on a deep level. So you mentioned at the beginning of what you were saying, do you like when people show up for you like this? And I was just thinking, well, of course. Like when I know when I have willing participants, or when someone's showing up in the relationship, showing up in the meeting, showing up for me in an obligatory way. Like you feel that on a weird level that's not even that's not totally you might not be able to describe why you know it, but you feel it. You can see it on them. There's a body language, there's a tone, there's an attitude that comes with obligatory versus willingness that shows up with an experimental attitude versus I'm putting forth effort. I want this to go well. I'm trying. We kind of know that about each other. And that leads into this idea that I think is important to spell out, that you and I were talking a little bit about before we got on here, that I wanted to make sure that was on the podcast. And that is, for every action, and particularly right now we're talking about obliging. For every action, there's a motivating force and a goal. So you have said famously, I mean, I don't know if you're famous, but you've said it, and I think you're famous. So that's enough for now. You've said all actions are goal-oriented. And I know that doesn't originate with you, but I heard it from you, and so I'm going to be the one to mention it. You've said all actions are goal-oriented. So if that's true, if all actions are goal-oriented, then there's also going to be, previous to that, a sense in which there is a motivating force that leads up to that action. The motivating force may be the goal, but it could also be what you're talking about, which is what I think is, what could you have if you were to show up willing and give your effort, and with all these other attitudes, take responsibility for yourself, take ownership, have truth, all of these things. What could you have? What's a vision for that? That to me is motivational force behind the action of willingness, with the goal of this vision that you're talking about. And so I think about marriage, for instance. What could your marriage be transformed like if you did not show up in that relationship because you have to, or because you were afraid of what people would think if you didn't, or because it's like you're just phoning it in. You're just going, I got to talk to this person again. Or it's just business. Like, hey, did you feed the kids? Right. And there's this tone and body language and all of these things that come into that relationship in that one little moment where it's clear that you are not showing up willingly in the relationship. You're showing up out of obligation, and you haven't put forth any effort to be there in a willing way. And so that's immediately what comes to my mind about this. So speak
Right.
to that for just a second.
I think a good observation is the difference between obligation and obliging. So deconstruct this just a little bit is looking at those relationships in which you really have that closeness in the relationship, and you're like, if that person asks me to do it, I automatically show up. I'm there for them. I'm giving it my best because I want that other person to look good. I want to show off their better aspects. And and if you have anybody that shows up, like you have a time in need, and they show up, and you're like, I can count on that person. And you're like, man, if you don't have anybody like that, they're rare. But when you have those, you are so grateful to them. You're grateful for them. You appreciate them when they show up. When they show up, you're probably smiling at them because of what they brought into the relationship. And that's, try to draw from that a successful one where somebody might believe in you, and they really see those good characteristics about you, and how you look forward to those relationships. You look forward to those interactions versus, and that's obliging, versus I'm obligated, like I'm forced to come here.
Mm.
That's a different mindset. But I think that can still be a positive perception if you are obligated to somebody that you really respect, you care for them, and you want the best for them. In a lot of ways, our marriages are like that. We are obligated in that relationship. We have taken a vow. We are committed. We have children. Whether you want to be responsible for them or not, you're legally responsible for them. There are certain things that we do have obligations, but it doesn't have to be a negative. It's how are you going to show up? And we know when we're in those type of relationships, we're like, man, I'm so glad that that person's there. I know I can count on him. He's going to bring his best, and he wants me to look good. And I'm like, those are great. But on the other hand, it's like, when the other person is just, it's everything. You're trying to welcome them more than they will be there. They're not present. They're not paying attention. They're lazy. They're unmotivated. And we would like for them to bring something else, but they're not. Just because they're not doesn't mean that we can't bring something else and maybe shake things up a little bit. Maybe we break the way we've had the relationship previously. And so instead of
And
being reserved, go ahead.
this shows up. Well, I'm hearing you. I'm like, yes. This shows up in a sneaky way. We go to church with the idea. We join with the church. The church is the people, not a building. So we join with the church, let's say, on Sunday morning, and we've just listened to the podcast on Saturday night. And we're like, all right, I'm going to show up and I'm going to be willing. And so you show up there thinking that I'm taking this attitude and I'm taking these actions. And then you do it, you're practicing it, and then you're not willing anymore when you get back in the van with the wife and the kids, or with the husband and the kids.
Mm-hmm.
That's how sneaky it is, right?
Absolutely.
That's how it's like I practice willingness. Well, it's actually in that when you get back in the van to go home and everybody wants something different for lunch, and your spouse doesn't have the attitude you wish they did, that's where willingness will really prove itself, will really show up, right? This is why we talk about dependence upon the Spirit, knowing that there's grace in Christ for us who fail all the time. And so I just want to say again, like, we're going to fail, and there's grace in Christ, and we're thankful for that. But the grace of Christ that we have for our failures is not a excuse to quit trying, to give up, or to become passive. And so if we use the grace of Christ as a reason not to seek to improve, then we're really abusing it, and it's really blasphemous in a way. So when willingness shows up, it's not just I went and practiced it in the place where I wanted people to think well of me, and I wanted to have good relationships. It needs to show up in the places that you aren't thinking about it needing to show up. Like, when your mom calls, when you are, you know, going to the dentist with the kids, when you are going on a date night. I have given couples in my counseling room the homework of needing a date night and given them some material like this is what you need to do on your date night. And so often what happens is that they go on a date unwilling. It's obligatory. It's Devin told us to, or I guess we have to do this. And that attitude shows up and it's felt. And so it hinders the progress. It hinders the ability to, again, going back to some of the other things, to be open to this going well, to take responsibility for yourself, to tell the truth, because it's like, oh, this person's unwilling, so they already have an attitude. And unwillingness looks a lot like a wall that's up. And so the sneaky part of applying these is that it's always going to be in places that you think, oh, I tried it and I did good, and then you kind of let your guard down and forget about it. And I think we're called to this in the most fundamental way within the nuclear family, within the husband-wife, parent-child relationships first, and that does branch out into other relationships as well.
So, and that perception of it's easy to do this in relationships where other people show up obliging to you. It's easy to keep it in that context. And biblically, it does talk about, but what credit is there in that? And doing things for people that are nice to you versus doing things to people that are not nice to you with the purpose that they may be saved or that they're being built up closer to God, glorifying God. So it's so easy when people are doing it to us, but so often we're not bringing that because of past hurt, because they didn't treat me the way that they should have treated me in the past. I've tried before and failed. Marriage is a really good example of that. It doesn't mean that we don't bring some hurt. It means we don't give up. It's like we know that there are hard things that we have overcome. And because we've overcome them, there's a deeper relationship there. There's a deeper purpose and closeness and intimacy that is there than somebody that if you just dropped your current spouse and you went out and found somebody that you thought was shinier and brighter, you don't have that history of accomplishment of what that person invested in you, you invested in them. You can see those better things in them. And what I'm saying is that no matter what relationship you're in, bring this attitude and see how it changes things. If you make yourself principled, I'm going to practice the principle of being obliging, and I may have been showing up not so well. So you're a kid in a family that shows up for work day or chores outside or something like that. And instead of being like dragging your feet, hum, drum, glum, whatever it might be, you say, you know what, today I'm showing up ready and willing. And that willingness brings energy that everybody feeds off of. I would even relate it to the fruit of the Spirit, which we've mentioned before. Fruit of the Spirit seems to be often about not what you're just producing, it's what other people can feed off of. And so if you're joyful, more people are joyful. So yes, you're producing this, and you see that has the impact. So one of the examples is also maybe you go to work and you're like, man, they should just be grateful that I'm showing up for work. Well, you have employed people, and yes, you are grateful for that body to show up and help, but you sure know the difference between somebody with a willing attitude, a dependable attitude. Like those are the people you want to be around you, and you want to share better things with them. And can we even reflect back? Let's practice some veritas and imputability. How do we show up with God? Do we show up more that we think that we have an idea of these principles of what God tells us to do, or we actually put what God tells us to do into practice. And so you walk out in faith, kind of like you don't know how this is going to turn out, but you believe that if he says it, then I'm going to try it. And then you find out it certainly didn't go the way you thought it would, but it certainly came out more fruitful in the end. And your relationships start feeding off of the kind of the fruit of the Spirit. So, those are some things to think about, some examples.
How many times do we see or read about Christ's willingness, Jesus' willingness? Like, this is an attribute of Jesus that in this, just a simple word of willingness, he died willingly. He gave his life willingly. He gave himself to them willingly. There was an attitude and action from our Lord himself that shows this attribute, right? That shows this action and this attitude of Jesus being willing. The text that I had prepared from Galatians 5 is about the aspect of the contrast of this, the biting and devouring one another. Galatians 5:13, for you were called to freedom, brothers, only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for the flesh. Kind of what I was talking about earlier. Don't take our salvation and the grace of Christ and use it to be lazy and passive and just say, well, I am who I am, doesn't matter, I'm not going to improve because, I'm forgiven, it doesn't matter. That's an attitude of an unbeliever, not an attitude of a believer. So it says, but through love, serve one another. And so what we're talking about with these 8 principles is really that. How do we do that well? What are some aspects of that look like serving each other, loving one another well? It says, for the whole law is fulfilled in one word, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. But if you bite and devour one another, watch out that you are not consumed by one another. And then it leads in from that portion to listing the fruit of the Spirit. And so this concept of our freedom in Christ is that freedom is purchased to allow you to do things, not to keep you from doing things. Freedom is not purchased so you don't have to do something. Freedom is purchased so that you get to do something.
What a concept there. And it falls right in line with the 1 Corinthians 10:23 through 33. All things are lawful, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful, but not all things build up. So we're seeking the good of our neighbor over ourselves. Why? Christianity is the opposite of nihilism. Christianity is obliging. So
Yes.
how you do something is based off of why you are doing it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Say that again. How you are doing something is based off of why you are doing it.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's, like it makes sense. It's like, why am I having to show up and do these chores today with the family? That's going to be reflected in how you do it.
Yeah.
Why do I show up with a good attitude towards somebody who maybe hasn't treated me so well? I'm not being frivolous when I say, because I'm trying to win them to Christ. Christ was the perfect example of obliging. He showed up willing to go to the cross for our own salvation, undeserved. So we really can't say that somebody's probably treated us worse than what Christ went through and that we are responsible for that. So he's been gracious towards us. Can we then bring grace towards others? And so, yeah, how you're doing it is based off of, the why. Why are you doing that?
So this is now set up for the next principle, which is understanding. And so in order for it not to bleed over into that too much so that we can discuss that next time, we'll stop the discussion there and kind of bracket it so that we can then handle understanding on its own, principle number 7. Is there anything that you want to add that you didn't get to add or say yet about this principle of obliging?
I think so. I think that recognizing that often we don't go to that level of obliging, not because of maybe some distant desire, but we really, as people, do have one of our biggest one of our biggest concerns is being judged. So it's not so much about have a fear of failure, but we have a fear of being judged. And so if we're trying to be this, that is putting down that fear because we have faith that there's something greater there. And so go ahead and take that step. It may be undeserved from how that person has treated you in the past, but I'm telling you that if you change, you will change the dynamics. Just as Christ changed the dynamics in our heart because of what he did, how he sees us, not how we see ourselves. And we trust that he sees us differently than we see ourselves. And one of those perceptions of that temperate principle is that let's recognize that some of our best thinking has led to the biggest problems. Some things we think that we want, we don't, that God knows better as to what's going to satisfy us and fulfill us. And so if he's got this somewhat of a principle in this relationship of doing what's better for other people to try to enhance that relationship and grow them closer to Christ, you will get something greater out of that than you can even imagine. And the relationship may go south, but you still gain something out of that step into faith. And so if I can leave people with a thought, you're talking about obliging is a step in that right direction. It does take you to do something different, get something different. That one step versus we're not thinking about things, we're doing something. So if something comes to your mind now and you're thinking, I could do this small thing for somebody else, do it. Stop thinking about it. Take a step and just see where it goes. The second you try to step up and be obedient to God, you often have these challenges come back at you, but it's worth you still keep going because you trust by faith there is something greater in front of you.
I love it. That's excellent. We will end on that, and we will be looking forward to next time where we do principle number 7, understanding. Hope you join us for that episode. Please make sure that your favorite podcast subscription that you like, subscribe to this podcast on your favorite platform, Spotify, Apple, or YouTube. Give us a like, comment on anything you see you like, quote in the comments anything that you heard that's quotable that you want to pass along. It helps to get the content out to others, and we greatly appreciate it. Until next time, thank you, Rick, and thank you for listening, and we will see you then.
Take care, everybody.